So the presentation I'm going to give today is focused on a project we had in the US, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So this project to develop homeowner materials was a partnership between NARA, which I'll get more into, and RCAP, which is the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. So our goal and my role on the project is we served as the experts focused on the development and the delivery of the training material that I'm going to talk about. So who NARA is, I've been involved with NARA. So I've been in this industry since I got out of college. For the last 25 years or so, I've been doing education and research all about septic systems. And one of the first things I did, which is what you're all doing here today, is being part of an association and getting education. So I went to my first NARA conference about 25 years ago, and I went up to the president of the association. I said, I'd really like to get involved. And he took me up on it. And that's one thing I'd always say, if you ever find a volunteer, grab onto them right away and give them a job, because that's, getting someone engaged, because we all have so much time. But what NARA is, again, it's the national organization in the US, which 100% focuses on the on-site and decentralized wastewater industry. And you guys can all read our mission, but again, it's really about bringing professionalism, but also we're always having this conversation too about the difference between centralized and decentralized, and we're not the redheaded stepchild, right? So the wastewater coming out of our systems is cleaner than the wastewater that's being discharged directly into our lakes, rivers, and streams. So we're always advocating nationally to make sure that, again, septic systems are viewed to be the permanent infrastructure that they are. So RCAP in the US, as you can see, there's different regions. Their real goal is to help communities, citizens, anyone who might need it with water and wastewater issues. So they're funded through the federal government, and they really do focus on helping usually small communities deal with water and wastewater issues. They haven't really focused much on septic systems in the past. They've more focused on small towns, and I would say small to medium-sized towns, but they've recognized that a lot of citizens need education who have septic systems. And so that was the real push of this project, was to develop educational materials that are targeted more at the individual home level. So this project was funded by our federal government, so this was an EPA funded project. So what was developed were a bunch of stuff, so I'll kind of walk through it. So we developed training materials. So this is all, again, even though we're not in the US, it was all grant funded. It's all publicly available. I'll show you links and resources that could be adapted. And that was the number one thing, is although they were developed on a national level, we understand that across the US, and certainly across Canada as well, it's not exactly the same everywhere you go, what sometimes systems are used or what kind of management requirements there are. But we know a lot of the stuff is same no matter where you live. So we developed a user manual. So this is something that can be printed and handed out, but it's also in an electronic format that's very user-friendly. We then developed training materials that are designed, if you could get people to either sit in a room like this or maybe online, 2 to 3 hours of education that could be taught by really anyone who has a general background about septic systems. So there are 4 modules, and I'll get a little bit more, but we kind of start with explaining to people, like, what is in your backyard? Because most people don't know. So an overview of the types of septic systems. Then we talk about what real management is and what is needed. The 3rd module goes over home management tips, so things property owners can do to extend the life of their septic system. And finally, and the one that is always hardest to actually have enough time to get to, but maybe the most fun, if your idea of fun is the same as mine, is more troubleshooting. So you show pictures literally to properties and say, what's wrong with this picture? But it kind of helps influence how things they do in their house can end up causing problems out in the septic system. So this is an image of the front of the user guide. So the training materials were all developed to supplement this. That doesn't mean that it stands alone, but you can envision 32 pages. Who's going to read it? Well, the last time I went to a user manual, when was it? Something was wrong. right? Usually, and now I know a lot of this is online, something's not working and you try to make it work and you're like, and usually I'll say to my husband, well, maybe we should look at the manual. And he's like, nah, right? We'll just figure it out. But me, let's go to the manual. And one of the sections I find to often be the most useful is they often have a troubleshooting section. So for instance, I have a ridiculous expenditure, but I have an espresso machine. It actually saves me money at Starbucks, but I can never remember the cleaning cycle, like how to get it to go into cleaning. Every time I have to go to the manual. So sometimes we don't use manuals. We may not read this, but some people, again, they just spent $15,000, right, on a new septic system. Some of them might read some of it. But so it is something, again, that is designed to either be handed to them or read online. So this is just an example of one of the pages, but I also wanted to show you on the right that there's, again, numerous chapters, right? So we start talking about why do we treat sewage, what's going on in your house, right? What are the typical features of a septic system? Where does the water go, which would be final treatment and dispersal? And then we get into some more practical stuff. Management, wastewater strength, which is things they could do in their home that impact strength. Some safety, just reminding people again, for instance, I have a tank with liquid in the ground that if that lid's not on, someone could drown in that, things along those lines. Landscaping and land use. You know, there's a lot of things we know people can do out on their property that can really potentially impact their septic system. And then you'll see maintenance, troubleshooting, and common problems. So, and that last one is chapter 12, which is the troubleshooting guide for homeowners. So here again, the user guide is available online. So if you snap the QR code, and all of this is on NAWRA's website. So if 2 months from now you're thinking, I would really like to, again, provide this with every install. Because the other thing too about educating, or again, those of you who are doing service, when you're out there, you know, you put it right on your receipts. The other thing too is by giving people information, to some degree, you're saying, this is your responsibility, right? I did my piece. You also need to understand your piece. So here's just a picture I just wanted to show you what the flip book looks like. I had never actually seen a user manual like this before, but it is nice. It's, to me, a little easier to use and a little bit more visual. A lot of, I would just say, of the user manuals I get from a company when you're buying a product are kind of hard to find. They're hard to search. They're hard to look through. This one, again, is a specific set of software to make a book that looks like this. And if you look across the bottom, there's even a function to read it to you for people who are visually impaired. You can print it, you can download it, you can search it, you can do all kinds of fun stuff with it. So the goal, again, of the training course, which I'm going to get into, which also has an online option, is when participants go through this, they should understand how their septic system works. They should be able to describe the maintenance that's needed with typical systems. And it does go into advanced systems, but again, most people don't have a lot of bells and whistles systems. They really have pretty simple systems. And again, for the most part, if you have, let's say you're in a community that has a lot of technology X, there are slides that you can unhide and you can show those. So the next goal is that they will be able, and hopefully they will, implement changes in their house to reduce the load to their system. If you actually get the chance to talk with people and educate people, some people will make changes. Certainly there are people who won't. But if many people understood how what they were doing in their house could impact when they next need to spend money on a new system, they might do that. The last goal, again, is can they solve basic problems? They are in no way going to become service providers, but there are occasional problems that they may be able to remedy on their own using the troubleshooting guide. I will tell you, many of them say contact a professional. So that is the answer for a lot of them. But there are, you know, we also know there are some people that are a little handier than others, and that can be good and bad, right? We don't necessarily need MacGyvers out there fixing things. But there are some people, again, who may be able to make some small adjustments to their system. So the resources that you'll find on NOWR's website is there's actually a training course overview and outline. And again, for most of you in this room, you're probably not going to go put on a training course tomorrow. That's not your goal. But I even know of some maintenance companies, real estate companies, other groups that have said, if we're educating our users, that's a good thing, right? It's a service we're providing. So that they can be, again, picked up by, again, you don't have to have a PhD in sewage, right, to be able to use these training materials, because the slide sets also have really good speaker notes to help people be comfortable. There's a pre and post test that's more fun, right? We're not grading homeowners. Another nice thing which I'll show you is there's some videos that are built into them, so that makes both the online training and the in-person training a little bit more interactive. You don't just have someone talking at them for 2 or 3 hours. We have videos and drone photos to show construction, and we also have those for troubleshooting. And finally, there's an evaluation. So the online content, and I do have a QR code of this coming up as well, but again, we then took the training materials and the user guide, and I would say we hired someone who knew a lot about online course development, and they made that real. It's actually, as far as, again, a homeowner class, it's meant to be interactive and fun. It's not just someone voicing over a PowerPoint. It's actually something where they have to do matching and kind of work their way through the course. So it does follow the 4 modules that we kind of talked about. So this is an image. If you go to that web address that you just saw, this is an overview of the home page. So on-site wastewater treatment system, homeowner education. So if they make their all the way through, right, it tells them they were successful, and it kind of walks through the content we discussed. It's free for anyone to take. The only downside is they do have to make an account. So I'm going to go back 1 second. So the web address that you, if you follow that through, actually takes you to, we have an online training platform. So it's not just this course, but there's one course that's free for homeowners, but we use this same online platform for all kinds of education. So if you're ever looking for septic system related education, NOWRA has a bunch of other content there. That's not all free, but it's the same platform. But this course is free, but the reason, again, why you have to make an account is that's just kind of how the platform is set up, but it's free to do that. And we don't reach out to people who have an account, so it's not like they're going to get spammed because they create an account. So that is the actual web address of the course. So the web address I showed you before kind of takes you to NOWRA's homepage that describes the course, but this QR code, or that kind of long address, takes you to the homeowner-orientated course. All right, so I'm going to go a little bit more into each of the 4 training modules. So the first one, again, is just an overview of on-site wastewater systems. So if they complete this, they will understand, hopefully, what's in their backyard, but it also does expose them to other types of systems. So if you're doing this yourself, you could definitely hide material, remove material, add slides if you wanted, but it covers, again, the most common systems that we see installed, and I think it's similar systems that you all install as well. So they should know, again, what's in their backyard, or what do their neighbors have, or what are other systems that might be out there. So they'll gain knowledge about various types of treatment and dispersal methods. So a lot of our time focuses on, again, what we still see to be the most common system installed across the United States, which is just a conventional system, right? It starts with collecting the wastewater, going through treatment in a septic tank out to some sort of drain field. And some people think, well, we're seeing more and more technology, and we are. So there are less of these systems installed today than there were 30 years ago, but in general, we still see that we have many parts of the US and the state I live in, about half of our systems have enough good dry soil to still put in a conventional system. So a lot of people still have a pretty simple system in their backyard. So many other options are talked about in that module. The second one, again, goes into management, which is the piece where you all fit into. So there's really two goals. One is to explain safety and land use issues that relate to their septic system. And when they leave this section, they should know the maintenance that is needed for their system. So what is laid out in that training is we have a pretty broad time span, and I think this is one of the hardest things that sometimes our industry faces, right? How often do you need to clean your septic tank? Well, my answer always is it's just like asking how often you need to change your oil. It's hard, right? It's hard to give a time period because it depends how many, miles you put on your car. So with septic systems, that's why you see this range. And also there are some regulatory frameworks that may have a very specific number. So the state I live in says every 3 years you have to have your system looked at. It doesn't actually say pumped. It says, evaluated, determine if it needs maintenance. So, and we all know that interval can be influenced by the size of the tank, their water use, and other habits, right? So if they have a hobby or a large family that increases the wastewater load, that's very likely going to change that time period. So again, the goal of this is to have them remember that solids must be removed, because if we are sending, again, excess solids out to the soil, to a sand filter, whatever it might be, that over time can overload that soil and can cause either wastewater back up into the structure, surfacing, or both. So here's an example of one of the videos that's incorporated into the course.
Most residential septic tanks should be pumped every 3 to 5 years. Some types of specialized or advanced treatment systems may require more frequent pumping and other maintenance.
Hi, I'm Robert, septic pumper in Northern Virginia. Your septic tank contains 3 substances: effluent, scum, and sludge. Over time, scum or grease accumulates on the top level, while sludge or solids sit on the bottom. During a scheduled pump out, the operator uses a vacuum line to remove the buildup. The effluent or untreated wastewater travels from your drains to filters that separate the scum and the sludge. These filters should be taken out.
That's the jacket you guys all wear, right?
Service. Follow recommendations from your service provider and local health department.
So do your part to be septic smart. To keep your system working in top condition, schedule to pump out your septic tank at appropriate regular intervals, and keep your maintenance records in a handy place so you know your system's service history.
So does Nova Scotia do something like Septic Smart? No? Yes? I know a couple of provinces in the Northwest have kind of, so EPA started a program, I think it was 10 years ago, where they pick a week out of the year and they call it Septic Smart Week. I don't think most citizens know it's Septic Smart Week, but it's a week out of every year where the industry, and particularly around the industry, I mean like counties and states, actually use that week as a way to just try to raise awareness. So, I don't know if they always call it Septic Smart Week. I know both BC and Alberta do some work around the same idea. So they developed these videos and some other resources, for instance, I'm going to talk about tomorrow for vacation home rentals, just as resources to help raise awareness about septic systems. All right, so then the third module in the training is home management tips. So these really walk through a home, kind of room by room, and talk about activities that could be happening in the home that could impact the septic system. So the real goal, again, is that property owners understand how they can make changes to reduce their load. So it really, I mentioned, walks through the different sources within the home, and then it talks about, again, whether it be your showering, your laundering, your toilets, how those different uses have a wastewater usage generation, but they also have a load. And so you can think about, particularly when you think about the kitchen sink, right? An area we all know that there could be a lot more waste going down the drain if they don't properly manage that. So here's just the other example, and I'm only going to show 2. There's a total of, I think, 7 different videos that are incorporated into the training.
Pouring fats, grease, and solids down your sink can clog your pipes or damage your septic system over time, requiring additional maintenance and pumping. In some cases, it can even lead to system failure. So do your part to be septic smart. Keep those harmful materials from going down your drain. Instead, collect that waste in an airtight container and then discard the food waste into a compost bin or trash can. Use cleaning supplies such as soaps, surface cleaners, bleach, etc. in moderation, as excessive use of antibacterial products and harsh chemicals can harm your septic system. Thinking at the sink can protect your septic system and prevent plumbing problems, which can save you the hassle and expense of costly repairs.
All right, and then the final module is troubleshooting. So the goals, again, of that module are to solve basic problems they may have with their septic system, and also, when it's not a simple problem, what are resources that could help them solve those problems. So any questions overall about the training materials?
How do you get that training to the homeowner?
Yeah. So the question again is, how do you get that, that material to the property owner? So I think there's a couple options. One is if you are a pumper or service provider, I would start, you actually, from my perspective of someone who works at a university trying to do education, you have a better chance actually, because how many homeowners do I talk to? How many property owners do you talk to? So if you can, again, either, and it depends on your audience, right? Can you give them a guide? Can you, on your invoices, list the online course? Or is there any way you can incentivize them? I do know recently of one grant where when they are funding, so I heard this morning there was a program about trying to get money in to help people who can't afford. They literally they're gonna require they take that course. Because they can't making everybody now go to a location and take a class is sometimes difficult. But to say you need to take an online class, I know of another jurisdiction that was actually giving so much off a permit if you would attend a class. Because from their perspective, and I would agree, is if you can get people to get this knowledge in their hands, that's the hard part, right? Is just getting them the information. So I think as an industry, we have to take every chance we can. Whether or not, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So you can lead them to the water, you can't make them drink, but at least we need to lead them. We need to give them, because think about the last thing you bought, right? Would you buy a brand new car and not get an owner's manual? But there are many septic systems that go in that the homeowner is never given educational information or a user manual, let's just call it that. So I think as an industry, we should be, and I'll just say it because no one likes this word, we should be required when they get a new system to give them information like, this is how your system has to be taken care of. So, and I only know of and sometimes it comes up more, I hear it with advanced systems, but it's true of every system. So, for instance, the state I live in says, if you're getting a new system and you're the designer, the engineer, I forget what you call them here, qualified professional, you have to actually develop a user manual for that system. It's not even a generic one, it's actually customized for that specific system. And we may not get there today, but I think for those of you here today, just passing on some information and saying, here's what you need to do to take care of your system is where we have to start. And I think there are other potential ways to incentivize people as well.
The link that you showed here at the beginning, is that public? Can you go in and get to that?
Oh yeah, so all the links I've put up here are all public links. Everything's free. Everything's available to anyone, so.
Can you go back to the last link?
Oh, yep, it might. Yep, I think the last one was the online course. Almost there. There we go. Yep, and this one to me, I would actually say and I mean this, I'm getting old too, but if you're younger, this actually is something you can do on your phone. Like it's meant to be an interactive online, I wouldn't call it game because it's not that fun by any means, but it is meant to be something that will work on a phone that's relatively quick and easy to go through. I mean, and you don't have to do all the sections. There's numerous sections to this, but if you, again, did it all, it still could take you an hour if you walk through the whole thing, but you'll definitely learn something, because to kind of progress from one thing, we put in what are called knowledge checks. They're not quizzes, but they're just ways to gauge, did you get what we were trying to get across?
So we can take this and teach.
Oh, apps, yeah.
I guess the question a little bit for Gary then, is there a discussion about turning something like this into more Nova Scotia based and then us being able to take this out and train, or have we looked through this and this is okay for as is for us to show people, or what?
I think this is the beginning of the conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, I would highly encourage you all. So I just want to remind you, there's kind of two sets of resources that are really available. One is training materials that could be 100% customized today to Nova Scotia. So like I can think of one very obvious thing. I know you guys are able to think in gallons and liters, not me. So my brain struggles with liters. So everything on that website talks about gallons, and that may not be a big issue to most people here because you're bilingual. Aside from that, though, those training materials are 100% customizable. The online course would take a bit more work, but what I would suggest is you go look at those. And since they're available, the online course is not something you can just go in and change, right? So if there was a real desire to make that course customized, we'd have to talk about what it would take to do that. But I'd highly encourage you to go look at it to see if it meets your needs and what changes are needed. And I would just say the heavy lift has already been done, so to make changes would be relatively inexpensive.
So from what I see, I flipped through this, the on-site water treatment system first, thank you, Kathy. It's a lot the same, I didn't read it yet, but it's a lot the same as we have a Nova Scotia Homeowners Guide to septic systems. They're pretty close to the same. So if you're looking at giving a customer a link for like something like that, we do have a Nova Scotia version of that you could give to your customers as a reference. Us as pumpers, if we go to a house that we carry the books in our trucks, and if we go to a house that somebody just purchased and doesn't know anything about your system, we leave them one. Here you go. Here's just a quick reading for you if you don't understand. They may read it, they may not. A lot of people are very receptive to it when we leave it. We can also, with us, we have our website, etc. We can put the link up to that to get them to that link as well. So it's a lot the same. Like I said, I haven't read the whole thing yet. I flipped through it briefly, but I see a lot of stuff back and forth.
Any other questions or comments? Well, as I was telling someone else, I've never not filled my time. Meaning usually I go over and people are like, yeah, can you stop? So when I saw this as the topic, I'm like, great, but I think I need to add a little. So just to fill out the hour. So I included, we have offered these materials as a train the trainer. So the goal here is just to give a little bit more background about the issues that our training addresses. So that's what I'm gonna do with the rest of my time here. So really the purpose of this section is to gain, because a lot of people who are coming into this, or we're sometimes talking with, if you think about other people who might be delivering these materials, come from all different backgrounds, and good or bad, most people know what a wastewater treatment plant is. They may not know what it does, but they understand it takes the waste, it cleans it up, right? That's what they get. So trying to make them kind of understand how really septic systems are really small wastewater treatment plants. So the goal, again, is if you were going to be delivering these training materials, just having a basic understanding of wastewater. And if you're ever speaking in front of people, your audience will definitely judge your credibility on how well you can kind of get across some of these basic principles. So all wastewater systems, again, have 4 common components. all of them, right? So they all have to collect the water. And that's really what we first started doing when we started doing wastewater treatment. If you even think about big cities, we did a really good job at taking the wastewater from people's houses and sometimes not treating it at all. Sometimes we were dumping into the ocean, right? Or dumping it into a lake, river, or stream. But people, from the very beginning, going back to when we first understood bacteria and viruses, figured out that sewage makes people sick. So let's get it away from us. So every wastewater system, and at a house, it's really simple, right? It's just that pipe leaving the house. So then the second thing that every good wastewater treatment system does is it treats the contaminants. And we'll talk a little bit more about how septic systems do that. And then kind of the third thing is, where does the water go? So even if we get it clean, the big distinction between a wastewater treatment plant is that it's going to discharge that water directly, usually into a lake, river, or stream, although there are a few now that are looking to replenish groundwater and do other things. With septic systems, we are generally going to take that treated water and we're going to put it into the ground, and actually most regulations require that it stay below the ground because that limits human contact. The other, though, benefit I like to think about is where I live, most people have private wells. And I certainly, when I was driving around, saw a lot of private wells as well across Nova Scotia. So that means people are bringing up groundwater that they're drinking in their house. And when you have a septic system, you're actually taking that water, you're running it through the septic system, you're treating it, and you're actually recharging the groundwater. So we're not taking water out of the watershed. So as long as that process is done right, we're actually recycling that water. Or some people might say reuse, right? So like the water in front of you, has it ever been drank before? You betcha, right? We only have so much fresh water on the planet. We're just recycling. I think we'd like to think sometimes when we're drinking groundwater, well, that was dinosaur pee, right? Probably not that old. Most of our groundwater isn't that old. And sometimes you might be drinking it out of a river. So I don't know if I mentioned, but I live on the Mississippi River. So I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it's a very large river that, drains through the U.S. Well, it starts in Minnesota. It's one benefit of being way high up in the watershed, right? Because they say by the time it gets to New Orleans and dumps in the Gulf of Mexico, it's been through 5 digestive systems. But so my current drinking water comes out of the river. Well, that river water is treated, right? It's not directly piped into my home. But you think about most people on private wells, they're pulling groundwater up and using it right away. Maybe they have an RO system. Most of them don't, right? Do most of them test their wells? I've done homeowner trainings. Occasionally, a few people have tested their well. So to me, again, this kind of gets at the last point, is when you have a septic system, you are the operator. You're the day-to-day person who's operating that system. You may not get it. And I would argue most of them are also operating their own water system, and they don't get that. So that's, all systems have managers. And with septic systems, we just think they don't, right? They don't have a manager. They don't have an operator. But it is the property owner who, in fact, is. So for homes and businesses on septic system, as we kind of went through, the collection is the household plumbing. Certainly what they're doing in their home and their fixtures impacts what goes out that building sewer. Their treatment is generally going to be in the septic tank and soil. So that soil, again, may be natural soil. It may be imported soil, which is what would we be using in a sand filter or mound system. And some systems do have advanced pre-treatment. So I mentioned most systems that go in, right, don't have advanced pre-treatment, but we are seeing more and more systems that do. Certainly if you are commercial, it is very often your waste leaving your facility can't be handled in a normal system. The waste strengths are just too high. The other real reason we may see more advanced treatment in the future is when nutrients are concerned, nitrogen and phosphorus, if you're very close to either fresh water or the ocean, depending upon whether we're worried about nitrogen or phosphorus. Many of our conventional technologies, our soil-based systems, are not effective at removing some of those nutrients. And finally, again, dispersal, most of the systems that we deal with on a regular basis are going to use the soil. But I just want to remind us, no matter how clean the water is after your pre-treatment, the soil can only take so much water. and how much water it can take is highly dependent, right, on the soil texture, but also where you may have limiting conditions or water tables that can influence that ability for water, even clean water, to move away from that system. So the management, again, is provided by the owner, not by someone who's certified operator. And again, the system may have someone who's in charge of doing the routine maintenance, whether it be every 2, 3, 4 years, but the day-to-day operator is truly the homeowner. So the purpose, again, of these materials is to give the homeowner information about how to operate and maintain their system. So why, again, we have septic system, the reason why we all have jobs is number one is to protect public health. When you are sick or ill with something, right, you are shedding those viruses and bacteria. So when we have good wastewater treatment, we are reducing the transmission of illnesses and diseases. Secondary, and I would say it's secondary, first is we want to have healthy people, but two, we also want to have a healthy environment. So we know untreated wastewater contains, again, organic material and nutrients, so we want to protect our water resources, both our surface and our groundwater. We don't want to see our water bodies eutrophic, which means, again, we've impacted that water quality, so now the species that used to be able to live in those waters can't. And finally, again, if you have excess organic material directly going into a water body, it sucks oxygen out of it. And when it does that, again, it lowers the available oxygen for natural aquatic life. So in the big picture, the primary difference between a large municipal system and individual systems is, first, it's very obvious, right? It's scale. We're talking about, the difference of one home to hundreds or thousands of homes. So the second is wastewater source. So generally with septic systems, we'll have commercial properties, but in general, we don't usually have a lot of truly industrial waste. And so I don't mean that, the line between commercial and industry, like I think a good example would be, well, you have a vegetable processing facility. Is that sewage? In my normal definition, it's not. It hasn't been impacted by human viruses and pathogens. It usually is under a different regulatory program. But in some municipalities, they'll take that waste and they'll run it through their wastewater treatment plant. We don't usually kind of mix that with our septic systems. The other one, again, that we've talked about a lot already is where does the finished product go? So is it discharged to a surface water or is it going into a subsurface system? So again, this is something we're all familiar with. And again, this is what I would say is a pretty large wastewater treatment plant. It does follow a similar path. It's just a little different. But there's a couple things that I want to point out that maybe are the differences. So we see, this is all open, right? That's one thing you can see right away. And with septic systems, most of it is just buried below the ground. But septic systems, again, do start with a very similar process. So if you think about... See, I can only point on one screen, but so when we start here up in the right corner, that's the grit screen, right? That catches all the garbage that people put down the drain. Wouldn't it be nice if every septic tank had one of those to catch the garbage? But I'll tell you, our cities don't want our garbage either, right? There's a lot of things we flush when we're on a municipal system. They have to collect that stuff and they landfill it, right? They can't treat a lot of the stuff people are flushing either, right? Flushable wipes, municipalities, they hate them as much as we hate them. So then you'll see it goes through a primary settling basin. Basically, that's like a septic tank, just really big septic tanks that allow heavy things to settle out, lighter things to float, cleaner effluent goes through. So the plant you see here then has an activated sludge, and it gets way more complicated after that because it's a pretty big system. But, and when we think about a septic system, again, showing our typical conventional system, everything after the primary settling basins that you see in the rest of this is basically happening in the soil. So with a centralized facility, wastewater from many sources is treated at a regional wastewater treatment plant. With a decentralized, typically, again, the wastewater is from a single source, sometimes a few sources, and it's treated on site. So the real benefit the real savings come from collection. So the collection with a septic system is very minimal in both what it is and its complexity. So when you look at, if you've ever worked around a small town where they've talked about, well, there's septics and they're thinking of sewering them, and they start running the economics, where things get really expensive is extending the sewer pipe, because those are deep, expensive sewers. So when we have something we treat it on site, we, one, don't have the depth, right? Things aren't as complex, and there's a lot of cost savings in treating the wastewater as close to generation as possible. So I mentioned it could be one or multiple homes. So this shows an example of a cluster system where in this case we have 9 homes, right? It could be 2 homes, could be 200 homes. But it's, when you look at the system again, it's just a scaled up septic system. So these can be used for new development. We also see them often used in areas where we had small lots, bad previous zoning. People don't have room on their individual property for a septic system. So you put in a small collection system, and in this case it has a lift station. That's more of an elevation issue, but trying to get the wastewater to the treatment site, where we then go through primary treatment in a septic tank. The system then has advanced treatment, and then we have our dispersal/disposal going on in the soil treatment system. When it comes to the actual wastewater source, there is a lot of variability in wastewater. And I think when we say residential wastewater, we assume all the wastewater is the same. And that's what most regulations assume, is that what's coming out of a house or what's coming out of a church, right? Is the wastewater coming out of the church the same as a house? Do you do laundry when you go to church? Right? Do you take showers? No, most people when they go to church, if they use the restroom, they flush the toilet, and if we're lucky, they wash their hands, right? So the wastewater actually is much more concentrated from a lot of our commercial sources, because they often don't have the same gray water use. So we often regulate wastewater treatment based on the volume. So I went and looked at your code yesterday, and I saw all kinds of references to how many liters per day, right, a home or a business produces. But it's not just liters, it's what's in the liters, right? So the easy part about wastewater treatment is actually the water, right? So wastewater is 99% water. It's the 1%, right, that we are really, truly concerned about. So we can't look at all wastewater sources the same. So large systems, and now we're going back to what's the difference between septics and municipal, is they have the benefit of dilution. So if today grandma in Truro goes on chemotherapy, does the wastewater treatment plant in town know? No, right? Because we're all flushing too. But when you have a septic system, and literally while I was sitting here, I got an email about a 4-year-old system where a child is going through treatment for chemo, and they're pretty sure it ruined their system. And the mom, who's the one emailing me, said, I've been told I have to fix it, but the problem is he's gonna be on chemo for the next 9 months. What do I do? Those are actually hard questions to answer. So, because what she's being told is I have to rebuild it, but if I rebuild it now, what's gonna happen? They're going to plug it up again, right? And so, the solution for those is often difficult because, and she didn't actually use the word rebuild. She said she needed a new one, but often when systems like that truly do malfunction, it's usually the upper 6 inches, give or take, of sand. It's not the full depth. So very often those systems you can take off the top and you can rebuild them instead of having to replace the whole system. So that would be true in a sand filter as well. The harder issue is what was the true solution for her family, right? So is Jimmy not gonna use the toilet? That's a pretty rough call, right? When you're going through chemo, after you get a treatment for chemo, the 2 to 3 days after you come home, whatever chemo drug you're on is coming out of your body in pretty high amounts. So to me, there's really a couple options. And I mentioned the one that is least preferable probably is that you get a porta potty, right, for those few days. You could operate your septic tank as a holding tank, but those both have cost, complexity, and expense. And then I'll add the third thing, and that is that not all chemo is the same either. There are about 130 drugs that are regularly prescribed that are called chemotherapy, and they're not all the same. Particularly their impact to septic systems isn't all the same. So we don't have an easy answer sometimes for some of these source issues because we don't have the benefit of dilution. So, and the option of moving to town probably isn't an option for that family either. I will say, some of you may know, I don't know if any of you get the on-site pumper or installer. So I write for that magazine, and honestly, the hardest thing is to write an article every month. So if you ever have an idea for a topic, let me know. But I just wrote an article, and someone asked me this question. It made me think really hard. Like, we're going to build a septic system for a drug and alcohol treatment facility. What should we do? And I didn't think the answer move to town was a good one. So then I started thinking about, well, what are the issues? One is flows. Those facilities use a lot of flows. But the biggest challenge related to what I just talked about is when people are going into those facilities, there's two challenges. One is and this suggestion actually came from someone who went through treatment. He said, when you go into treatment, do you know what you do right before? Have you ever gone on a diet? What do you do the night before you're starting a diet tomorrow? You binge. He said it's the same. When people are going to treatment for alcohol or drugs, they have one last bender. And so they go in with all kinds of stuff coming out of them. And then depending on even alcohol, I didn't know this until I researched this, but many treatments when you are going through one of those is they put you on other drugs to help you. Right, to help you with symptoms and other things. So it'll be a pretty interesting mix coming out of those. And again, people are coming and going all the time out of treatment facilities, so there's a lot of turnover. And we got into other issues about food prep. Like a lot of these have bigger ones will have a commercial kitchen. Like there's a lot of challenges that go around with what source can be. And that's a pretty unique example about how source can be a challenge. But you can have those issues anywhere from a single family home through commercial facilities. So. All right, so thinking about sources again, we know that our septic systems can serve a wide range, everything from a single residence, a school, and schools, for instance, are notorious at having super high nitrogen levels, right? Kids do a lot of peeing at school, apparently. Less pooping, I guess, apparently, based on data I've seen. So a commercial establishment and even sometimes an industrial facility. So even if you have an industry that, again, we may say we're not going to treat the vegetable processing waste, but there's still employees there. So very often they're going to need a septic system as well. So each of these sources is going to have a specific volume. And so you always need to know how many liters per day is your design flow. And I always like to remind property owners that design flow is a peak flow. I hope they never see that amount. And maybe they do, but it needs to work. So the day they have graduation or Christmas or whatever it is, the septic system needs to work that day. But that is not to be viewed to be an average daily usage. They should be well under that, and most homes are. So there's that volume, but then there's the solids content, the organic content, and then there's the timing. So I think COVID has shifted this even for some homes, but in general, people use water in the morning, right? They have breakfast, they sometimes shower, right? And then the big other wastewater slug is in the evening when people, again, are cooking and doing laundry and things along those lines. But when you think about commercial, that can be very different, right? When businesses use water. So the focus of the user guide is predominantly residential. We really didn't get into a lot of the commercial issues if you're a property owner because that's kind of its own ball of wax. And those systems do get to be a little more complex if you think about being the operator of that system. But we must understand that every residence produces unique wastewater and that our septic systems must be individually designed. There is not one right answer for every property. It needs to be based on both the users and also your site conditions, right? The soil being the most, I would say, driving factor around what's the best technology or system to treat that wastewater. So our understanding of how kind of water moves through a system, again, we start with preliminary and primary treatment. So that does, again, deal with inorganics, but it also, the number one goal of that first step is solid settling. The secondary treatment is where we would see organic strength reduction. And this happens even in a septic tank, right? The amount of organic material coming into a septic tank is about half, just due to mainly settling and a little bit of anaerobic digestion. So the last one, again, is tertiary treatment, and this is something that is sometimes passively done in our systems and sometimes actively. So this would be dealing with nutrients and pathogen reduction. So just looking a little bit more at solids. So our organic solids are paper products, lint, trash, waste from the garbage grinder, it's fats, oils, and grease. And finally, our fecal waste contains organic solids. So when we consume food, our body takes whatever energy it can out of it, and the rest of it, of that organic material, passes through our body. It also contains inorganic solids, soil, detergent binders, minerals, other things that are just naturally present, are also part of the solid component. So how do we deal with the solids? Well, first is just physical removal. So the septic tank operates on a buoyancy process, meaning things that are denser than water are actually going to sink to the bottom of the tank, and things that are lighter than water are going to float. So they're just really natural settlers. So we design most of our septic tanks to have somewhere around 2 days of hydraulic retention time for this separation to occur. So when you think about why do we have 1,000-gallon tanks, right? So that really looks at having a couple days of hydraulic retention time and then about a day's storage of sludge and scum. So when we think about, we don't want people to have to pump their tank all the time, right? So we build in some of that storage capacity. The inlet baffle helps to provide separation. So again, that there's time also so that the wastewater doesn't kind of shoot across the tank. So it travels down and allows some time for that settling. And the outlet baffle in particular prevents solids and that scum that is hopefully sitting on the top of the tank from exiting. So here's just a typical configuration of a 2-compartment septic tank, and they all can look a little different. And this one, again, to me would be a more modern one. A lot of our older ones, we wouldn't have 2 accesses, but the nice thing about when you have 2 access, certainly it's needed for a 2-compartment tank, but having one over the inlet and the outlet also allows for problems, right? If you have problems in those locations to clear things out. It also shows an effluent filter or an effluent screen on the outlet of the septic tank, which to me is, again, a really great addition to allow, still in a passive way, cleaner effluent going out to the soil treatment area. So how we typically measure how much solids are present in wastewater is there's a lab test called the Total Suspended Solids Test, so we often refer to that as TSS. Our goal is to have the least amount of solids possible going out to whatever is downstream. The cleaner the water is leaving the septic tank, the cleaner, again, the longer the soil treatment system is going to last. So having more septic tank capacity and or staying on top of your maintenance is going to help you have the lowest TSS. So the organic solids are slow to degrade. It's not like these things are readily just digestible. So, and the mineral solids or the inorganic will not degrade. So if we are sending solids out there, like let's say, we'll talk more about this tomorrow if you're gonna be around, like lint, like a lot of the lint coming off of our clothing now is synthetic fibers. The soil can't break that stuff down. It doesn't know what to do with polyester and spandex, right? Cotton and wool it could eat. So solids will build up over time. So you think about why eventually does a soil treatment system malfunction? Some of the reason is because some of the solids we put out there, the soil microbes can't decompose. So besides solids, we also have the organic matter component. So when we try to get solids to separate out of the water in the septic tank, they are then held though. So if we're just settling solids out in the bottom, that's gonna build up over time. We do know that there are bacteria living in that tank though. And where do those bacteria come from that live in septic tanks? The biomass? Oh, the bio-waste, yeah. Most of the microbes living in the septic tank came out of our guts, right? So we are digesting food. So when our fecal waste goes out to the tank, it has all those microorganisms that we're used to, and our guts are anaerobic too, right? We make stinky gas. Same microbes go out to the septic tank and they continue to break down that waste. So every time you flush the toilet, you are feeding microbes that are actually pretty happy to live in a septic tank. So generally speaking, again, the amount of organic material raw compared to what's leaving the septic tank will have about a 50% reduction. So the fats and oils that should be minimized, but the stuff going down the drain is the stuff that, again, should be floating up into that scum layer. Also, some detergents tend to be more buoyant and float up as well. So the effluent leaving the septic tank that dissolved some of it is dissolved organic material. So if you've ever taken a sample out of the kind of the clear zone of a tank, it's still dirty, right? It's still cloudy. And when you see that it's cloudy, what you are seeing is some solids that didn't settle out. So that's often referred to as the turbidity of water when it's cloudy. But what it's telling me is, well, there's still stuff in there, right? It's not clean, even though it's a lot cleaner than what came out. So most of that organic material is removed by bacteria then in the soil. So any remaining organic material that makes it out to the soil microbes, it's kind of like a picnic, right? You don't invite the ants, they're just there. The same with the soil. When you start putting food out there, the microorganisms come to eat up that food. Other dissolved compounds also can move out. So it's not just organic material, also pathogens. So remember, again, the bacteria I said feeding the septic tank come from our guts. So that means the viruses and bacteria, the most common source for them is going with our feces as well. So the problem is when they get to the septic tank doesn't deactivate them. That really takes an aerobic environment. So that's usually either in a secondary treatment system or with most of our systems in the soil. So a few more things and I'll wrap up. So when it comes to real treatment out in the soil, this is one of the most amazing things I think about taking the wastewater out of a septic tank and you run it through soil. So this shows an elevated system with sand. So you run it over the sand and we have this aerobic environment. And that aerobic environment provides a complete conversion of the organic material to carbon dioxide and water, which is around us all the time. So it's pretty amazing that a relatively passive system can do that. So the soil treatment area should be close to the soil surface because how we get oxygen to our system is just naturally the air around us has oxygen in it, and passively that oxygen just gets into the soil. So how much organic material? The typical way we quantify that is by the BOD, and that's actually a measure of how much oxygen you need to break down the organic material. So not all the organic material can be oxidized. So there are things like pharmaceuticals and personal care products, and that's a whole conversation on our own, on its own, in that we have more and more things we're now finding out in the environment, we're looking for in the environment. But there's been some good research that's been done out on Cape Cod. Similar, I would say, they get winter, it gets cold there, and they have a lot of sand. So they've been doing a lot of research actually tracking the removal of other contaminants than the stuff we've always been talking about. So there is a lot of research going on to understand how septic systems compared to municipal plants actually often exceed treating many of these other contaminants. So the last thing I'm going to hit on is nutrients. So we are the primary source of nutrients. So our urine and the proteins in our waste have both nitrogen and phosphorus in it. So we generally excrete these things and they go out into septic systems. So the process of removing nitrogen is a bit complex. And I'm not going to get into depth about it today because we don't have time, but this is the one area we have seen in many of our coastal areas where there's increasing concerns about septic systems adding nitrogen into the oceans, because oceans are nitrogen limited, and that means their growth of weed and algae is fed by how much nitrogen is available. So if the biggest problem, like everyone's probably heard of in the US, is like once you go below New Orleans, nothing can live. There's this huge dead zone. It's because of excess nitrogen. Most of it not from wastewater, most of it from agriculture. But if you have too much nitrogen, it's really not good for the ocean, particularly in really kind of sensitive zones. So there are ways to treat nitrogen. The other big issue is phosphorus. So phosphorus is the problem nutrient for lakes, rivers, and streams. So if you're close to wetlands, to lakes, to rivers that are fresh, again, that's where phosphorus gets to be a bigger concern. But there are ways I would say both passive and more active ways to deal with nitrogen and phosphorus if that's a concern. The last thing, again, is pathogens, but good septic systems, the good thing is they deal with pathogens, so not really a concern. So this is the other thing we're going to hear more about in the future, and that is reuse of wastewater. And to me, the only issue is we are reusing all of our water. It's just a function of how quickly. So the picture on the bottom right, they're using wastewater to grow grapes, right? In some areas, they're taking treated wastewater and usually using it for toilet flushing. So kind of what else are we doing kind of to wrap this up? The user guide is going to be converted to Spanish. That was a request of EPA, is that we have, I think it's the second most common language. You guys might want it in French, I guess. So we needed it in Spanish. We are also developing new curriculum. So we have a new grant where we're developing curriculum for operation and maintenance, a design-oriented training that's solutions for difficult sites, and a third one that's helping small communities find wastewater solutions. So if you're interested in any of those, we actually have steering groups that are helping. I'd be happy to put you on a committee if you're looking to volunteer. So the last thing here is my contact information. So if there's anything I went over today or in the future you'd like to reach out for resources, I may not always have the answer, but I can connect you with someone or get you additional resources. So the top website is our website at the University of Minnesota. The second one is NAURA, who also has a huge network of people across the country and I would say internationally as well. So.